What if I told you that history's most celebrated explorers were hiding secrets so dark, so disturbing, that they've been buried for centuries? From cannibalism to mass murder, from betrayal to unspeakable cruelty, the heroes you learned about in school had shadows darker than the uncharted territories they explored. Get ready to discover the shocking truth behind exploration's greatest names. Secret 1: Christopher Columbus. The slave trader. Let's start with the most famous explorer of all, Christopher Columbus. While schools teach us he discovered America, they conveniently skip over his role as one of history's most brutal slave traders. Columbus didn't just encounter indigenous people, he systematically enslaved them. In his own journal, Columbus wrote about the Taino people. They would make fine and skillful servants, for they repeat very quickly whatever we say to them. Within 4 years of his arrival, Columbus had shipped over 500 indigenous slaves back to Spain. But here's the truly horrifying part: he calculated that the Caribbean islands could provide 4,000 slaves annually. Columbus implemented a tribute system so cruel that indigenous people who couldn't find enough gold had their hands cut off. His governance was so brutal that even the Spanish crown, known for their own cruelties, arrested him and stripped him of his titles. The man celebrated as a brave explorer was actually a genocidal maniac whose actions led to the near extinction of entire populations. Secret: Hernan Cortés. The ultimate betrayer, Hernan Cortés conquered the mighty Aztec Empire. But what history books don't tell you is how he achieved it through the most calculated betrayal in human history. Cortés didn't just defeat the Aztecs, he manipulated them into destroying themselves. When Cortés arrived in Mexico, the Aztec Emperor Moctezuma welcomed him as a guest, believing he might be the returning god Quetzalcoatl. Cortés repaid this hospitality by taking Moctezuma hostage in his own palace. But the betrayal goes deeper. Cortés deliberately spread smallpox among the indigenous population, knowing it would devastate communities with no immunity. He watched as entire cities died agonizing deaths, then stepped over the corpses to claim their gold. Even his own men were horrified by his cruelty. The darkest secret. Cortés burned his own ships to prevent his men from retreating, forcing them into a fight-or-die situation. He was willing to sacrifice his own soldiers' lives for conquest. This wasn't exploration. It was calculated genocide wrapped in the flag of discovery. Secret 3: Captain James Cook. The cultural destroyer Captain James Cook is celebrated for mapping the Pacific and discovering Australia and Hawaii. But Cook's expeditions weren't just about navigation. They were systematic campaigns of cultural destruction that wiped out entire ways of life. Cook carried secret orders from the British Admiralty to claim any lands he found for the crown, regardless of existing inhabitants. He introduced diseases that killed millions of Pacific Islanders who had lived in isolation for thousands of years. But his cruelest act was the introduction of European animals that destroyed fragile island ecosystems. In Hawaii, Cook was initially received as a god during the Makahiki season. But when his ship broke and he returned unexpectedly, the Hawaiians realized he was just a man, and a dangerous one. Cook had been stealing sacred artifacts and disrespecting local customs. His death at Hawaiian hands wasn't random violence. It was justice for cultural crimes. The secret Cook's legacy hides? His detailed maps weren't just for scientific purposes. They were military intelligence that enabled later colonial invasions. Every island he explored became a target for exploitation. Secret 4: Vasco da Gama. The Indian Ocean terrorist Vasco da Gama opened the sea route to India, but his methods were so brutal that even hardened pirates were shocked. Da Gama didn't just explore the Indian Ocean, he terrorized it into submission through acts of unspeakable cruelty. During his second voyage to India, da Gama captured a ship carrying 400 Muslim pilgrims returning from Mecca, including women and children. Instead of simply robbing them, he locked them below deck and set the ship on fire, listening to their screams as they burned alive. He did this not for strategic reasons, but to send a message of terror. Da Gama's torture methods included tying prisoners to his ship's cannons and blowing them apart, or forcing them to eat pork and drink wine before execution, acts designed to ensure they couldn't enter their version of heaven. He established a reign of terror across the Indian Ocean that lasted for decades. The darkest secret. Da Gama kept detailed records of his atrocities, proud of his efficiency in establishing Portuguese dominance. His exploration opened trade routes built on the bones of innocent people. Secret 5. Francisco Pizarro. The ransom killer, Francisco Pizarro, conquered the Inca Empire with just 180 men. But his victory came through the most elaborate deception in exploration history. Pizarro didn't defeat the Incas through superior strategy, he destroyed them through calculated treachery. Pizarro captured Inca Emperor Atahualpa during a peaceful meeting, then demanded the most expensive ransom in history, a room filled with gold and 2 rooms filled with silver. The Incas, desperate to save their emperor, stripped their temples and palaces bare. They delivered exactly what Pizarro demanded. Then came Pizarro's ultimate betrayal. Despite receiving enough treasure to make him one of the richest men in history, he executed Atahualpa anyway. But the killing method reveals Pizarro's true cruelty. He offered Atahualpa a choice: burn alive as a pagan, or convert to Christianity and be strangled. When Atahualpa converted hoping for mercy, Pizarro strangled him with his own hands. The secret historians hide: Pizarro planned to kill Atahualpa from the beginning. The ransom was never about money. It was about systematically stripping the Inca civilization of everything valuable before destroying it completely. Secret 6. Henry Hudson. The abandoner, Henry Hudson, explored the Arctic searching for the Northwest Passage, but his expeditions ended in one of exploration's most disturbing mysteries. Hudson didn't just die during exploration, he was deliberately abandoned by his own crew in one of history's most chilling acts of mutiny. During his final voyage in 1611, Hudson became obsessed with finding the Northwest Passage, pushing his crew beyond human endurance. When ice trapped their ship in Hudson Bay, the crew expected to return home for winter. Instead, Hudson announced they would stay and continue searching, even though supplies were running dangerously low. The crew's desperation turned to horror when they realized Hudson was hoarding food for himself and his favorites while others starved. When crew members confronted him, Hudson's response was chilling. He threatened to maroon anyone who questioned his authority on the ice. The dark secret: Hudson's own crew set him, his teenage son, and 7 loyal sailors adrift in a small boat in the middle of Hudson Bay, with no supplies, no compass, and no chance of survival. They were never seen again. Hudson's obsession with glory led to the abandonment of his own child in one of the world's most hostile environments. Secret 7. Ferdinand Magellan. The enslaver of chiefs, Ferdinand Magellan attempted the first circumnavigation of the globe, but his journey was marked by betrayals so shocking that his own men celebrated his death. Magellan didn't just explore new territories. He systematically enslaved local rulers and turned exploration into conquest. In the Philippines, Magellan encountered Chief Lapu-Lapu of Mactan Island. Instead of respecting local authority, Magellan demanded that Lapu-Lapu convert to Christianity and pay tribute to Spain. When the chief refused, Magellan's response revealed his true nature. Magellan gathered warriors from neighboring islands and forced them to attack Mactan, essentially turning indigenous people against each other for European benefit. But his cruelest act was taking hostages. He captured Chief Humabon's wife and children, threatening to kill them unless other chiefs submitted to Spanish rule. The secret that history books skip? Magellan's death wasn't heroic exploration gone wrong. Lapu-Lapu killed Magellan in battle because the explorer had become a terrorist threatening the freedom of every chief in the region. Magellan's own crew refused to help him because they were disgusted by his methods. Secret Marco Polo. The possible fraud. Marco Polo wrote the most famous travel account in history, but scholars have uncovered evidence suggesting the darkest secret of all: he might never have made his legendary journey to China. The man who inspired centuries of exploration may have been history's greatest fraud. Polo's account contains glaring omissions that suggest he never actually reached China. He never mentions the Great Wall, despite claiming to travel along routes where it would be impossible to miss. He never describes chopsticks, tea ceremonies, or foot-binding, cultural elements so fundamental that any visitor would notice them immediately. More suspicious, Polo's descriptions of Chinese cities often match those found in Persian and Arab travel accounts that existed before his journey. It appears Polo may have copied other travelers' stories, adding fictional personal details to make them seem authentic. The darkest possibility: Polo may have traveled only as far as the Black Sea or Constantinople, gathering stories from other merchants and weaving them into an elaborate fiction. If true, this means the book that launched the age of exploration was based on lies, and countless explorers risked their lives chasing routes described by a man who never actually traveled them. Secret #9 Sir Francis Drake. The pirate knight, Sir Francis Drake, was knighted for circumnavigating the globe. But Queen Elizabeth's favorite explorer was actually a pirate whose expeditions were elaborate robbery schemes. Drake didn't explore for science or national glory. He explored to steal on an international scale. Drake's circumnavigation was actually a piracy expedition. He attacked Spanish ships and settlements along the Pacific coast, stealing so much treasure that his ship nearly sank from the weight. But Drake's cruelty went beyond simple robbery. When Drake captured Spanish ships, he didn't just take their cargo. He tortured crew members to reveal hidden treasure locations. He marooned Spanish sailors on deserted islands, leaving them to die of starvation. His treatment of indigenous people was equally brutal, enslaving entire villages to work his stolen mines. The secret the British Empire hid. Drake's knighthood wasn't for exploration. It was payment for delivering stolen Spanish treasure directly to Queen Elizabeth. Drake was essentially a government-sponsored terrorist whose heroic voyages were actually international crimes that brought England and Spain to the brink of war. Secret Robert Falcon Scott. The incompetent leader, Captain Robert Scott, is remembered as a tragic hero who died reaching the South Pole. But the truth about Scott's Antarctic expedition reveals incompetence so shocking that it borders on criminal negligence. Scott didn't die as a noble explorer. He died because his arrogance killed his entire team. Scott's expedition was doomed from the start because he refused to learn from successful Arctic explorers. While Norwegian explorer Roald Amundsen used sled dogs and skis, Scott insisted on using motorized sledges that broke down immediately and ponies that died in the Antarctic cold. But Scott's darkest secret was his treatment of his own men. When team member Edgar Evans suffered a severe head injury, Scott refused to slow down or provide proper medical care, essentially leaving Evans to die. When Lawrence Oates, suffering from frostbite and gangrene, famously walked into a blizzard saying, "I'm going outside, and maybe some time," it wasn't noble self-sacrifice, it was suicide driven by Scott's pressure to keep moving. The most shocking revelation: Scott's team actually reached the South Pole, but they all died on the return journey because Scott had miscalculated their food supplies. Recent analysis of Scott's journals suggests he knew they didn't have enough food for the return trip, but pushed forward anyway, essentially murdering his entire team for personal glory. These weren't brave adventurers seeking knowledge and glory. They were criminals, frauds, and killers whose expeditions left trails of destruction across the globe. The age of exploration wasn't about discovery, it was about exploitation. And the heroes we celebrate were often the villains of their own stories. The next time you hear about these great explorers, remember the truth. Behind every celebrated discovery lies a dark secret that history tried to bury. But the truth has a way of surfacing, no matter how deep you try to hide it. What other historical figures do you think are hiding dark secrets? Let me know in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe for more shocking historical truths that will change everything you thought you knew about the past.